Hello everyone, this is CJ with Cycletron. Today I'd like to talk about the fact that it appears that Harley Davidson has fully embraced its decline. And before I get into the details, I'd appreciate it if you would please like and subscribe. I appreciate all the support you all have been giving me as I've ramping up my channel here. It's no secret that motorcycles have dropped considerably since the high water mark of 2006. Here's a chart of annual motorcycle shipments from Harley Davidson from 1992 to 2016. You can see in 1992, it was about 75,000 bikes. The peak of 350,000 bikes was 2006. And in 2006, they generated $1 billion in profit, by the way. It looks like by the end of 2020, their sales may actually be under 200,000 bikes. I mean, this is alarming to a lot of people, especially fans of Harley Davidson motorcycles. I like Harleys. I ride Harleys, as you can see here. I'm riding my 2019 Street Glide Special. I've done a lot of recent videos about why they are doing what they're doing. I mean, people feel strongly about Harley Davidson, including me. And unfortunately, it seems like they're doing a lot to alienate customers in an era of declining sales. Starting with this topic, I did a video about how they screwed themselves by screwing their dealers. In 2020, they dramatically cut production, over 30%, and deliveries to their dealers. They closed about 70 out of 700 dealerships throughout the United States. They seem to have poor attitudes towards their customers and poor customer service in many, but not all dealerships. I did a video about that topic. I've been in some good dealerships, and I've heard from you folks out there who have had good experiences yourself, but there's way too many on the other side, which has led to the question of just how vulnerable Harley Davidson is in terms of being able to operate and continue in the future. Are they leaving themselves open to being bought out by other entities, even foreign entities, as has happened with Chrysler, who was bought by an Italian company and now is being sold to a French consortium? The former CEO of Harley tried to reverse these downward trends by launching his More Roads to Harley program. That program was supposed to increase the quality and technology in their touring and cruiser bikes, which is pretty much all their bikes, and then coming out with new middleweight bikes in the 750 to 1250 cc range, including the Adventure Tourer and the Bronx Street Fighter. Also, some higher performance models were supposed to be coming and rolled out by 2022. They were also supposed to develop smaller displacement motorcycles in the 250 to 500 cc range that was really to target newer markets like India and other locations overseas. And of course, pushing their Livewire project by introducing electric motorcycles, starting with the Livewire model, which was to be a premium model, followed by other electric bikes after that. Well, that CEO was out earlier this year, and then in March the new CEO comes in and shakes things up completely, basically puts the kibosh on the More Roads Leads to Harley plan. In the most recent earnings call on October 27th, 2020, the new CEO presents what is going on with him. Here's the new CEO here, Joachim Seitz. You know, it's no secret that they've had a lot of issues, and this earning call was supposed to answer a lot of these questions about what was going on with them. So they presented a lot of detailed financial information. They showed that they had about 124,000 motorcycles shipped to date, which is 28% lower over the prior year. And of course, their revenue was down as well, 26% over the prior year. And just looking at the percentages of sales, motorcycle sales still account for over 70% of their revenue. They also make money, as you would expect, through financing and general merchandising, t-shirts and the like, and charging for putting the Harley Davidson logo on products made by other people. But what really caught my ear was the quote by the current CEO during the call, basically explaining this whole approach. We sharpened our approach and policies around supply and inventory management to help preserve the value of our bikes for our customers, while almost completely eliminating promotions and discounting activities. So, bottom line, they've cut production. They're trying to drive up the cost of used bikes, which they've done. They're basically selling new bikes for full retail price, and they're not spending any more money on marketing efforts. Well, they've certainly held true to that. Shortly after that earnings call occurred, it was announced that Harley Davidson discontinued their sponsorship of Milwaukee's big music festival, the Summerfest. I mean, that's a big event in Harley's hometown where their headquarters is located, and they can't see fit to continuing sponsoring that. It was also recently announced that they've discontinued their sponsorship of racing events. As you see here, about a month before this call, they had announced that they were pulling out of India and other markets. During the earnings call, they clarified that they were pulling out of 40 markets around the world. They said they were not making much money in those markets, so, no big deal. Of course, previous to that call, they had announced that they were discontinuing their Bronx Street Fighter. This bike was supposed to appeal to a younger segment of the motorcycle market. I mean, kind of bad news all the way around if you really look at it. Shipments way down, revenue way down. But what do you think happened? During the earnings call, while they're talking about all this bad news, the stock actually went up 15% and then continued to go up throughout the day, ending well over 22% after making those announcements during the earnings call. So clearly Wall Street loves these kind of measures, because even though they have declining revenue, they're slashing expenses. So it's going to boost earnings in the short term. And unfortunately, that's what Wall Street is geared towards, short-term profits. So, what are you going to give me next quarter? What's my dividend going to be? Doesn't really bode well for long-term viability of a company, in my opinion. But in this world we live in, this is the reality for many publicly traded companies. They jettison the long-term initiatives like More Road Leads to Harley for their current plan, which they call Rewire. And we'll know a lot more about how long they plan to continue down this path when they announce their 5-year strategic plan at the next earning call for the fourth quarter in February 2021. They're calling that plan their Hardwire plan. But let's kind of drill down on what this really means for the company. Why would a stock price jump dramatically when your sales are going down? Well, in a product life cycle, one of the stages is the decline stage. And you can actually make very high profits during the decline stage of a product. A harvest strategy is a marketing or business strategy that involves cutting back on investments in a product and basically raising your profit margin. You're extracting as much profit from your existing customer base as you can, even though you expect the customer base to decline over time. You're maximizing your profits on those sales. So again, I mentioned the product life cycle theory. The idea is you introduce a product and sales are slow in the beginning. This is going back to the harvest strategy, as I was saying, from Investopia.com. And then that's what they're doing. And part of the harvest strategy is actually raising prices pretty significantly. It seems counterintuitive, but that's part of the strategy. But again, that's what you do at the decline phase of the product cycle. But here's what you have: the introduction, growth, and maturity, and the decline phase. The problem is the decline phase, by its very nature, results in you stop selling the product. Now you can have multiple growth phases, as what happened with Harley Davidson. They experienced a big growth period after World War II, and again when baby boomers were buying motorcycles, mostly in the 90s and early 2000s. Now there's also a possibility of extending your essentially maturity phase instead of entering into the decline phase or trying to recover from a decline phase. And that's what they were trying to do with the More Roads Leads to Harley. You can see that top line, that product extension, trying to get a little more life before you really enter back into the final decline stage. And with the More Roads, they were trying to do that by introducing a broader range of motorcycles that would appeal to younger, newer riders, and to pursue sales in new markets around the world Like I mentioned, in India, it's one of the largest motorcycle, if not the largest motorcycle market in the world. And hopefully those people later on will be buying the larger, more expensive bikes in years to come. But clearly instead, the current management of Harley Davidson has fully embraced the decline. They're like, screw it. There's too many headwinds. Our revenue is going down year to year. Fewer people are buying motorcycles. Fewer people are buying Harley Davidson motorcycles. I mean, their current market share is down to about 42%. During the sales call, their CEO was like, you know what, so what? He didn't say that, but that's how he conveyed it. They're still making money. Motorcycles mean a lot to many of us, but when you boil it all down, it's just another consumer product. And unfortunately, the people running Harley Davidson, they're strictly business people. They're not motorcycle people. These are the business people selling motorcycles. They're not motorcycle people running a business. And you take the idea of a consumer product and apply it to another area like the iPod. I didn't even know they still sold them, but they do. The iPod made a lot of money for Apple. You can see the product curve follow the classic pattern. You know, they introduce it, sales grow, it matures, and then the product declines. And with consumer electronics, these cycles typically span a decade or less. It's not very long. But at the peak in 2006, the iPod accounted for 40% of Apple revenue. And this chart ends at 2014 when the iPod accounts for 1% of its revenue. So the thing with Apple is they're obviously diversified. They just don't sell iPods, they sell iPhones, and they do other things that generate a lot of revenue. Again, over 70% of Harley's revenue comes from its motorcycles. Does it look like they're planning to introduce other products? I mean, they introduced the Livewire, and that was a complete flop in terms of sales. It's a cool bike, I've ridden one, but to me, I'm not going to spend 30 grand on it. So the worrisome thing in terms of the future viability of the company is the cut in marketing. You know, went on the internet, and it's actually kind of hard to find information about how to run a business when it's in decline. It's all geared towards trying to turn a company around. That's everyone's natural instinct. But, here's another indication that they're clearly going the other way. And that is when they cut their marketing budget. It reduces the chance of getting new customers, it reduces the number of returning customers, and ultimately it has the potential to ending the product or business altogether. If you look at the Harley sales chart or shipment chart, the one we looked at earlier, you can see this big ramp up in the 90s to the early 2000s. I remember full well what was going on during this time period. You went to a Harley dealership, you made a deposit on a bike, sometimes that deposit was non-refundable, and you waited weeks or months for your full price Harley to show up. In fact, some dealers were charging a surcharge, charging over MSRP for the privilege of buying a Harley Davidson. Now the sales are going down to under 200,000 bikes this year, which is equivalent to what they sold 20 years ago. So I think their decline is going to look like a reverse of what's going on from 1992 to 2000. It's going to look like it did year 2000 going back to 92. In that time period, down back significantly to 75,000 bikes a year. I'd be out riding around, and sometimes I'd see a business that was closed down, and it kind of bothered me. I'd think, it's kind of sad or depressing to see a hulk of building that was a store that you frequented, especially if you're in a small town and you see a mom and pop store that was all boarded up. And I thought, man, that's kind of depressing, And then not long ago, I had this other thought, different take on it. I don't know the whole story of that business. Maybe this mom and pop store served its purpose by supporting a family and many employees, and maybe some related businesses for decades. Maybe it was time to shut it down. Maybe they weren't making much money. They were working harder and harder for fewer dollars. Maybe their kids had no interest in running the business. They wanted to move to a bigger city or do something else. So sometimes you don't know the whole story. There's certainly been past examples of companies, even in the motorcycle industry, that failed at one time. We all know the story of Indian that went out in 1953, and then a few decades later, Triumph. They went through bankruptcy, followed by complete liquidation. Then other people bought the rights to the name and started up manufacturing and moved on. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Harley Davidson, but I think the evidence and the verdict is in that they have fully embraced their decline. So where's this going to lead? I don't quite know yet. I've got some ideas that I'll post in upcoming videos. So in the meantime, I appreciate all of your support, and we'll see you soon. Thanks very much.